We're here. We're here. We're like 5 minutes late. I'm sorry. My son says I'm time challenged, but actually, we just had those little things that we had to get going today. We've got some very, very special, I think, a great opportunity. We have Joy Pullmann joining us. She's going to join us through Skype. Joy Pullmann is with the Heartland Institute. She's a fellow research with Heartland Institute. And let me see, I've already lost her bio, which I had so typed out for me so well in my notes. Research fellow of the Heartland Institute and a managing editor of School of Reform News, which is a national monthly publication. In that capacity, she has interviewed and produced podcasts with many of the leading figures in school reform. She previously was the assistant to the editor of the American Magazine and the American Enterprise Institute, which is a great organization. You hear me quoting Arthur Brooks quite often from that organization as well. But first, we're going to go with a gentleman out of Wisconsin. We're talking about Common Core. We've dedicated a lot of this new show. Oh, by the way, hi, I'm Tamara Scott. We are just kind of jumping in this today, Ryan. I am Tamara Scott. I am your host, and it's my honor to get to be your host. And thank you for allowing me into your car, your office, your cubicle, your living room, wherever that may be. Thanks for joining us today. Common Core is taking over the schools. People consider it a federal takeover. Meetings are starting to happen. Parents are starting to wake up and starting to revolt. Thank heavens, it is necessary. Joining me today is first Joy. Joy will be with us, but on phone is Mike LeMay. Mike, can you hear me?
Tamara, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining me. I know you do a show. You just got off air on your show, and your show is on what, K90? Do you say K90 FM?
Q90 FM. It's Q90FM.com. Heard worldwide at 9 a.m., yes.
Very good. And thank you for taking time out to join us. You had put something on a website about an assignment, and what cracked me up, it's a required assignment for parents.
Oh, Tamara, it is crazy. It's a righty-lefty thing. We just covered it on air. And you know, the way they frame how conservatives and liberals believe on issues is fairly accurate. But the language, like one of them had talked about the environment, and it said, liberals believe that we should tax gasoline and get rid of those monster SUVs on the road. And basically, conservatives don't care about the environment. They care more about profits. The way this thing is skewed is bad enough. And what we shared on air is, remember a couple things. First of all, these are 12 and 13-year-old children. And even we who are, and I'm as conservative as you will find, but at age 12, I was a pretty progressive kid. I wanted the whole world to hold hands and sing Kumbaya and all that good stuff. But as you grow to see the evil of man and really the evil of the progressive movement in the nation, your eyes begin to get opened up. So you've got progressive teachers giving a skewed survey to impressionable children. And in my opinion, Tamara, what's happening here is data mining of kids and their parents. And really conservatives are being set up here for Big Brother.
And you're right. This is data mining, and this is why we're going to be talking today with Joy. We're going to just give the whole show, dedicate the whole show to the data collection, to the data mining, the concerns that it might be sold, that it will be transferred, how it will be used, how students might be limited by a label pegged on them by a teacher who may or may not be right in the second grade, and that could follow them the rest of their life. The FERPA laws that were changed and how the administration is going to regulate those FERPA laws, which most people don't know. We're going to get into this later today, but most people don't know when you go into the FERPA law what they consider being able to use as identification and tracking you is everything from retina scans, iris scans, biometric pulse, voice indicators. It's so concerning. And so, Mike, we will also be getting into today later on the cameras that they're going to use, the biometric bracelets that they're going to have on these kids. But what you're getting right here is just the beginning.
Oh, it really is, Tamara. It is the underpinnings of Big Brother. I have a friend who has worked for Homeland Security and the National Security Agency, NSA, and I can't share his name, but he has shared with me when I was talking about the NSA surveillance. He said, Mike, you guys are only understanding the tip of the iceberg. We are reaching a point where the government is going to be able to monitor our children, every belief they have, everywhere they go on Facebook. We're really, and my concern, they could sell the data, but you get the wrong government in there, and I would argue we have the wrong government in there now. This could be used for political reasons.
Right.
This could be used for reasons of discrimination. And we are just walking into this blindly and just saying we trust the government. Well,
our founding fathers told us not to, Mike. Our founding fathers warned us not to trust any of them, which is why we in America have those checks and balances in place. It's we the people.
It is. Thomas Jefferson said every citizen should be armed, so if necessary, they could revolt against a repressive government. And, this whole FERPA thing, much of this, my understanding, has been done again by executive fiat. Right. Not a law, just a president deciding he wants to change the law, and we just blindly follow.
And so your website, standupfortruth.com, standupfortruth.com. Folks, if you go to that website, you can find the Colorado sixth graders' parents required to take righty-lefty survey. And honestly, this is not new. When my daughter was in second grade years ago, we were given a contract to sign of what we were going to teach her as parents. And I said to the teacher, I'm her parent. By the time they get off the bus, go to music lesson, go to a sport, get their bath taken, have supper, get their practicing in, I don't have time to get to be mom, play a board game, read a book, have fun. I'm mom. You answer to me. You're the teacher. You sign a contract what you're going to teach her this 5 weeks. And it was my warning at that point to get my kids out of that school because they were making it look like I signed under the authority of the teachers, and that's the danger here. So,
Tamara, no institution, in my opinion, has done more to discredit Judeo-Christian principles in this nation than the public education system. Sadly, and we talk about this, we just had the mother of the student who brought this home and her aunt on. And, we shared that the average parent spends about 5 minutes per day in meaningful conversation with their children, and the school system has their attention for 7 hours a day. We have got to skinny down those odds. We have got to start investing in our children, finding private education wherever possible. And if you can't afford it, at least know what your children are being indoctrinated to when they go into school.
Absolutely. And I would add to that, we need to get away from an overburdened tax system paying for everybody else's free lunch.
Tamara, you're right. I mean, you think about it, we have a group of narcissists we're raising these days. These children believe that the federal government should provide for education. They should provide a retirement fund. They should provide education. What made this nation great was people could get off their keisters, and if they worked hard and they had a modicum of skill, they could succeed. But now we've dumbed it down to we want to equalize results, and that just cannot work in a democratic republic.
You're absolutely right. My guest today is Joy Pullmann. Joining me shortly. This on the phone is Mike LeMay. I just met Mike by phone yesterday, and it's encouraging, Mike, to know that you're in Wisconsin. You're speaking truth on the airwaves across the internet, across the sea, wherever you can. Thank you for doing what you're doing.
Oh, we appreciate it, Joy. Tamara, it's an honor. And it's standupforthetruth.com. Standupforthetruth.com. You can get a copy of the survey. And I would encourage parents, get involved in your school boards. Get involved. Find out what your children are being taught and indoctrinated. If you wait until they are 16, 17, 18 years of age, the horse is probably out of the barn.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Mike LeMay, L-E, capital M-A-Y, with standupfortruth.com, standupfortruth.com. And he's talking and warning you about those school board meetings, and we have more meetings happening. As we're here today at the Science Center in Des Moines, Iowa, is the New Generation Science Standards meeting. And, of course, they're very well orchestrated. I don't even know that the public can speak out, but you can at least go and see how you're being assaulted. Also, last night in Ankeny, Iowa, there was a meeting on the standards-based grading, and then I just spoke to a reporter on my way here, and he was telling me he was wanting to learn about the Common Core, asking me questions, and he said, I just covered a board meeting where they were talking about getting information from students without parental notification, and they were cloaking it under the guise of needing information for those lunches, those the school, that when you have help government-wise with your lunches, the paid for lunches, that I would warn you, this is exactly what happens when you have the government outside of its authority. That shouldn't be coming through the government. That's for charity. That's for Christians, for those in need. But when we do that, gives the open door then for government to misuse those avenues. And now in that meeting, they were talking about getting information from students without parental notification, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about today with Joy Pullmann, Pullmann, Joy Pullmann. You may find her at heartland.org. Joy, thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Tamara.
Now, are you going to be joining us on Skype? This is exciting. Ryan does this all the time, but I haven't got a Skype in this studio yet, so I'll be looking forward to that. Thank you for taking time out to join us. We're going to be talking about data collection and mining. And you are the expert. When I told Mike I had you coming on, he said, you've got the expert. This is confusing because we live in America and we don't think this kind of thing happens. But just give us a summary, if you will, when we hear data collection and mining. What are we talking about? What are we getting into?
Well, what we're really talking about is that we now live in an era where things that you do on a computer can be tracked, monitored, collected, and then analyzed, basically like the NSA has been doing on our cell phones, like Google can do on our Gmail and on any Google Docs that we use and so forth. And so the more that computers get into schools, simply because Americans, modern world relies on them as a way of life, the more data is available for people to collect and manipulate. So this means everything from, computer system tracks things like student grades. They track things like student behavior reports. They track things like students' medications, their parents' names, their address, their social security, or so on and so forth. So basically anything that goes into a computer system regarding a specific child and his or her file, it's not actually a paper file anymore. Usually it's an online file. That is information that a lot of people want to capture. They want the government to capture, and then they want the government to start doing things with it to change the data, to change the children attached to it.
And of course, we just saw, you mentioned the NSA, the IRS, and of course there was a new email out from Newsmax.com that the government is collecting your email contacts, just those you like, those who are your buddies, those who are your associations on Facebook. They're collecting that data as well. And Joy, it just seems so concerning as to why government would even want that information. But let's get into this. How are they going to collect this information? We've heard from New York, and I was talking with you yesterday, in the testing area. First off, whether it's assessment and test or assignment and text, there's a difference there. But they kind of overlap because we just saw from our guest that was an assignment, but it's also a data collection.
Right. And well, like I said, it's basically the fact that things are computerized that enables an assignment to become a test. So in the past, you might have just, say your Spanish teacher has a daily vocab quiz, right? And 5-minute little quiz, et cetera, used to be handed out on paper. He or she, marks them off really quickly and so forth. But if you do that on a computer, then you have all of those questions and all of the student responses to that available to be collected and analyzed. And then you can aggregate it. You can collect it into larger pools than just one class of students. You can collect all the students, who use perhaps a specific kind of Spanish, a Spanish flashcard software. And then you can, notice what sorts of things, the responses they give, and if there are really common mistakes, and then what do students do who get past these mistakes and so forth. So the era of what they call big data has been coming to a lot of different levels of government, and really, the convergence of, and it's the same thing with text. We see there's a company called Knewton, Knewton, and they work in higher education, and they literally are tracking because they provide online courses to students, and so of course through those online courses, kids watch video, they look at diagrams, they look at text, and what they actually can do is track how long students look at a particular chunk of text, even as they're trying to get down to the sentence level, or if they watch a video several times, or if they replay certain sections of the video. The company is collecting all of the information about how students interact with that. And again, it becomes a reflection of the way that the young person thinks. It becomes a reflection of their personality, their learning habits, their learning styles. So just by moving paper things digital, you open up this whole realm of possibility of, again, using, reading becomes an assessment, something that somebody can measure you by, where, before it was not that intrusive and personal and detailed.
And so when we're talking about the test or the assessments, how they're going to collect this data, let's go to New York. We have parents very upset. We have several principals, superintendents who have written a letter to their education commissioner with concerns about the testing. And in that, they mention that children have nosebleeds. They're vomiting. Teachers are asking for guidance in how to handle tests. When we want biometric information, I just guess you just got it. When kids are vomiting on their test. Now, you asked me yesterday, is this a protest vomit because they don't like the test? I don't think so. It's a stress. What is so stressful? What's happening? I mean, I think parents need to understand what is happening to your children, what you're subjecting them to. Even if it's not the personal, sensitive snooping into your home, spying into your home through your child, the pressure on these kids is so great. They're physically breaking down.
Well, and I have to say, I am not against testing children. I am not against holding out a high bar for them. I'm not against taxpayers knowing what public schools are doing with the money if kids actually can come out and read. But there's kind of an atmosphere. I think really what happens is when you use tests for more things than they are meant to do, then that really increases the pressure on anybody who is connected with the test, teachers and then students and parents and administrators and so forth. And so we basically have this situation where because public education isn't naturally responsive to the parents and children who have to go to it. I mean, typically you're assigned to a specific public school. That public school continues to get tax dollars, whether they do well with children or not. So since there is no internal accountability to what parents want, what teachers want, then you have to impose external accountability. And so that's why we have seen the rise of standardized tests using for them, for everything and its mother to measure, when really, standardized tests, look, that they tend to be pretty accurate, but we don't really know how wise it is. And we've been experimenting basically to see how wise it is to pay a school or to reward a teacher based on the results of a child's one test at the end of the year, or maybe, tests from the growth from the beginning of the year to the end of the year and so forth. So that's kind of the reason that we have this really awkward system where tests now rule the universe and they've determined so much. That's why I focus on them a lot of the time when I think about them, because I mean, if you just have a test that a teacher gives to children, the test is, first of all, to give some accountability to the students, right? Have you learned the material, both the student and then, the stud, that's kind of a point where the child will say, look, I have to learn this material by the time we have this test, because otherwise my grade will reflect that. It's also useful for a teacher, right? Because they can say, wow, this child really knows fractions. He really doesn't know decimals, or so on and so forth. So that's really, again, it's a kind of an internal mechanism that's really helpful to students, teachers, and parents to know where the child is, what he or she knows, and so forth. But then when you start attaching all these strings to it, such as school funding, whether schools are going to be turned around by the states or the federal government, whether teachers are going to get a raise or continue to have their current jobs, so on and so forth, then everyone starts getting nervous and doing all kinds of other crazy things. So school districts, for example, I was talking to a teacher from Virginia just yesterday, I think, and she was saying that her school district does some different, some like 32 days of testing a year when only about 2 or 3 of them are required by the state. But her school district decided to add all of these tests because they're doing pre-tests and mid-tests and so on and so forth in order to get ready for that end of the year test and everything. And so when you turn schools into, you have this kind of, again, isolated place where the only way to get any accountability is to have some external, somebody saying, we want a metric, we want some data points in order for you, to continue getting public funding. Then you basically create the system where the data points are the be-all, end-all of education, rather than satisfied parents, educated children, educated citizens, and so forth.
And this is where the danger comes in. The curriculum will follow. They're getting around saying we don't have a national curriculum. That's why this is still legal. But this is where the curriculum will follow because people will teach to the test. And I think it was John Whitehead, the man who wrote, I think, Government of Wolves. He's got a great article on Huffington Post. And that, Joy, that tells me this really has problems when websites and liberal media outlets like Huffington Post start crying out about their concerns on this. But he's talking about the fact that all this is going to do, this testing doesn't in any way ensure that students learn more. It doesn't ensure that they'll be smarter or that they'll be better students.
Well, actually, testing does have a small effect it does have an effect on what students learn. It does increase their learning.
But he's saying it won't improve the test scores. We saw this with No Child Left Behind when we tried to punish schools for bad scores. And he's saying
Right.
that,
Well, of course, then it's not the student being punished; it's the school being punished for the student, not learning or the teacher not teaching. So, of course, you want to punish people for their own actions, not for collective actions. Otherwise, it's totally useless.
okay. And so let's go back to this testing. And we're not just talking about the information, the academic. I think we could all understand, but on even some of this, there's concern about age appropriate, asking students
Uh-huh.
in second grade things about geometry that they've never even been taught.
Yeah.
So there's concerns about the content itself, but then there's concerns about the manner and what they're testing. Let's get into the biometric scanning.
Okay. Well, this is, of course, one of the creepier aspects of it. And so I want to be very careful to be extremely accurate about this because, you always get people talking about, oh, those conspiracy theorists who think that we're going to, strap eye scanners on children and so forth. So let me talk about where all of that talk comes from. So one of the primary places that we get the interest in getting kids biometric information. Well, first of all, it's from the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, the FERPA law you were mentioning in your introduction. That was expanded to say that an educational record can include a student's biometric data. Blood type, eye scans, fingerprints, and so forth. And schools are beginning to collect that data. So for things like not a lot, but we've seen a rise in schools scanning children's fingerprints or their palms in order for them to get their school lunch. That's just kind of like they don't have to have a card, they don't have to register. They bring in their hand with them everywhere they go, and that's how they can get their lunch out. Or so there was a big flap in Florida about a school district that wanted to implement an eye scanning program for children for their bus routes. The child would literally scan their eye as they walked onto the bus, and then they scan their eye again when they arrived at the school, so they know who was on what bus at one time and that they all arrived safely. And so the big flap over there was not only that this was happening, and there are other school districts considering the same thing, but that the school district or did the prototype scan of all the children's eyes without even notifying. Not even like asking for consent, which is legally required, but not even notifying parents. And then, of course, everyone freaked out, and the school district says, "Oh, that was an accident." Well, an accident like that, is like, booking my child, with the police station, and then later being like, "Oh, we're sorry, he didn't commit a crime." You can't just wander around, have accidents, and take my child's eye scan. Anyway, so again, so with the more the collection of data and the information age, you just see more and more of that being available for people to collect, track, and analyze. But where the people, there are kind of two main sources for concerns about biometric data sensors in schools. And one of them comes from a federal report. Let's see, I think it was my life moves so fast. I think it was spring of this year, February of 2013, that the U.S. Department of Education put out a report. It's called Promoting Grit, Tenacity, and Perseverance. It's a long report, several, I think 200-300 pages long. And I was one of the first people to read it and notice, the U.S. Department of Education is really excited about they want more data about children than just their academics. Reading scores, how boring. If the child can do math, that's really boring. But what we find fascinating is if a child is persistent, if a child is sociable, if a child has 21st century skills like collaboration and empathy for disparate groups. These are, literally almost quotes from the paper. And so basically enhance their understanding of children by not, they didn't suggest doing this in all schools, but they suggested that it would be good to fund research on children using biometric sensors, such as, literally this is in the report, MRI machines, such as, posture shift, like shifting chairs, so they can judge if you're fidgety or if you're bored or slumping or so on and so forth. Little cameras on the computer or mouth sensitive or pressure sensitive mice that can track a child's eyes as they are reading something on the computer screen, and also can tell facial expressions to notice if they're frustrated, bored, excited, or so forth. And of course, record all of that and analyze it. So that's one source of people. And so a number of people like me, who, if you're a parent or a normal human being, you think, why the bleep would the government need to track my child's eyes as she's reading, or researchers is reading something on a page. I think you can have a good education without, tracking a child's eyes and treating them like a robot or a herd of cattle. So that's one of the sources of confusion that the Department of Education, they also tied that to the Common Core standards by saying, well, that the Common Core standards, especially in math, they demand student persistence. So this is a really good invitation for test makers to start tracking and analyzing children according to their persistence, whatever the belief that means, according to their persistence in their math homework. So expect to see some of that out of people pushing Common Core products, at least those influenced by the Federal Department of Education. Another area that we've seen concerns about data or biometric monitoring of students comes from the Gates Foundation, which is the biggest bankroller of Common Core in the world, in the country. And so Gates, I like to say they have more money than God. They have about $2 trillion in their big pot of money. That's as much as it takes to run the U.S. federal government for a year. It's more than the entire economies of a number of nations. And so with this amount of money, they fund lots of things. And one of the things that they've been funding are, little wristlets that gauge students' biometric data. So their perspiration, their heart rate, just kind of like the physical activity that is going on when children are learning in the classroom. They think that will produce something useful for helping children learn more better. So anyway, those are some of the main sources of complaints that people have about.
It is so sci-fi. It's like we're putting our children in a Star Wars, or they're going to be monitored, wired up. I can't imagine the fear for young kids doing this. And I know they're resilient and that they'll catch on, and they're probably used to the technology better than we are, but they know stress. I can't imagine the invasive treatment that our kids are going to be used to. And again, Washington Post, we got to go to a break here, but on your way out, think about this. Washington Post reported students reported feeling overstressed, underprepared, meeting the test with shock, anger, tears, anxiety, and administrators requested guidelines for handling tests with vomit. Teachers and principals complained about the disruptive nature of the process. Nosebleeds, suicidal ideation, even hospitalizations were some of the unprecedented extremes, and that's out of the Washington Post as well. We've got to take a break. Stay with us. Joy Pullmann is my guest. Joy, Pullmann with Heartland Institute, heartland.org. We'll be right back after these messages. I am Tamara Scott, bringing you information that you can use when the headlines hit home. So we'll get you informed so you can be empowered. We'll be right back.
If Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of America was your personal webmaster, Tom would filter out all bad debt emails. If Tom was your mailman, you'd never get any debt reduction junk mail. If Tom Coates was a lineman, he'd block any phone calls offering to reduce your credit card debt.
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America, and we're still your best choice for credit counseling.
We're local, we're accountable, and we can do more. You make the call when the time's right for you.
When it comes to competition, there really is none for Consumer Credit of America.
Yes, now your favorite programs on Webcast One Live can all be watched and listened to on any Android or Apple device. Your phone, tablet, or iPad. Yes, your favorite shows on Webcast One Live are available live or on podcast wherever you go. Let me introduce to you some of our great shows.
Shalom. Every week on Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman, we'll talk about issues in the Middle East, issues related to the Jewish tradition and religious traditions in general, and keep you up to date on exactly what's going on around the world. You may know some of the story, but you haven't heard all of the story until you've heard it on Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman and our special guests we have on every week.
Hi, I'm Doc. You listen to me every Tuesday from 6 to 7 p.m. on Doc and Lefty radio podcast program, where we discuss all the relevant topics of the day, including state, local, and national politics. My partner in crime, Lefty, often likes to have a little bit of conservative justice served upon him, so please turn in for the fireworks every week from 6 to 7 p.m. on Tuesdays at webcastonelive.com. Thank you.
So when you want to watch your favorite Webcast One program, remember, there's an app for that. You know, there's an app for that.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
And I am Tamara Scott. Thanks for staying tuned with us. We're talking about data collection and mining that is taking place already in the schools, and it will be taking place on a much grander scale, and your children will be subject to it. Joy Pullmann is my guest today, Pullmann, Heartland Institute. Heartland.org is how you can find Joy. If you'd like to join this conversation, you can join us in the chat at webcastonelive.com, webcastonelive.com. Chat away to us. I've just uploaded a couple of the links we're talking about of articles that she's written on this topic, and I'll upload some more on there as we talk. You can also join in the conversation live, 855-244-0077, 855-244-0077. Joy, I said this was mandatory because some of the articles I read said if we had agreed to take the money, if we agreed to be part of the applicant for the Race to the Top, that we had to comply. Is this mandatory?
Is data tracking mandatory?
Yes.
Or is biometric data collection mandatory?
Well, let's take both of them separately.
All right. Data collection is absolutely mandatory for states that, well, first of all, just for states that get federal funds. The feds get to tell you what data you will collect and turn over to them. And then second of all, data collection is mandatory for states that applied, that have an agreement with the federal government and with the Common Core testing organizations to participate in those tests. And that's nearly all states. So in the first instance, you know, what data that the feds get from schools just in general is defined by statute, mostly under No Child Left Behind, the largest federal education law, and that asks for aggregate student information. So that's the law that requires that states test every kid in reading and math from grades 3 through 8 and then 10th grade. And then they have to publicly report and turn over to the federal government the aggregate scores of students. So what that means is we need to know at the school level, you know, what your average percentage of reading proficiency is at, you know, at grade 8, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so forth. Same in math. But the new thing that we're moving into with the Common Core data collection is that the states have signed these agreements with the two Common Core testing groups. They're called PARC and Smarter Balanced.
Let's go through that PARC, PARCC.
CC.
And that's
yes.
I
call it that because it has some grotesque name like the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers.
Right. But that's it. That's what we're hearing. I want people to hear that because you're hearing that from your elected officials. You're hearing that from your governor and your lieutenant governor here in Iowa. We're hearing about Smarter Balance. We're hearing about NGSS, the New Generation Science. We're hearing about STEM. We're hearing about PARC, and that's the College and Career Readiness. So go ahead, Joy, but I wanted people to understand that's what we're hearing about.
Right. And so states have signed an agreement with those two testing organizations. I mean, that's how you function when you every state that has had testing signs agreements with the feds and with their testing company. And so in the contracts, they say that the states will provide to those testing organizations student level data. So not aggregate student data, not piles of anonymous student information, but information specific to specific students. So you hear states telling you that's not true. We're going to report only aggregate data like we always have. But then I say, well, look at the agreement that your own state signed. It says we will provide you student level data. It also says that those testing organizations get to determine what that student level data will be, and they have not published those policies. So we don't know what it is. We don't know if they're going to ask for students' names. We don't know if they're going to ask for student social security numbers. We don't know if they're going to ask for, all kinds of ways of identifying children specifically so you can't cross records and so on and so forth. That is entirely unknown, and it actually isn't subject now to really voter or representative oversight because those testing organizations are nonprofits that on which states, if they have any vote at all, have one out of a dozen, 2 dozen states or so. And not only that, the representatives to those organizations are usually from state departments of education. They're unelected bureaucracies under, typically the governor's authority. So there's no chance for for voters to call up a representative there and say, hey, I want you to do A, B, and C, or I'm not going to vote for you. They don't care. They don't get votes from voters. Anyway, so those organizations are going to get student level data, and we don't know what that data is, but they get to pick. And then if you study the contracts that those two testing organizations have with the federal government, and they have a contract with the federal government because it provided them all of their operating funds. So that agreement that with the federal government, defines here's what you promised to do in exchange for the money that you got from the nation's taxpayers. Thanks, everyone. And so one of the things that they have promised the federal government will do is provide any open access, and this is almost a direct quote, a verbatim quote, open and direct and complete access to any and all student data collected at the state level. So I call this the student data pipeline. Pipes promise these testing groups they'll give them student level data. The testing groups promise the federal government they'll give them the student level data. So it's basically, a direct pipeline from school to the federal government of whatever unknown information these unelected testing organizations decide that is necessary to collect about your children.
Okay, we've got a caller online. Diana, can you hear me? Good morning.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Thank you, Tamara, and thank you, Joy. We had our Alabama State Board of Education meet to adopt a resolution about the data in which they won. We were outmanned anyway. And, he's pretty much saying he can protect the data. And it's almost like he was saying he's not really required to give, but certain data. And I'm thinking, I know in the flexibility, the No Child Left Behind waiver application, they're required to furnish data. So we really don't know what kind of data they're going to be giving away. He's trying to say that, he has control. And I know with all the hacking that's went on with Twitter, you really don't have it. And then when I look at the website like Advanced Ed, which Advanced Ed, ADVANC, and capital ED for Alabama, it is a global community where they pride themselves on one login to access data. So tell us about this. I mean, it's very, very disturbing, the assurances from our superintendent. And then when you see you're part of a group that has global reach and they're priding on one login.
Okay, Joy.
Yeah, actually, Alabama has a unique situation because they're a state that wants to do the Common Core standards but has pulled out of those national testing organizations. And so they say they're going to do their own Common Core tests, and I'm pretty sure they've gone with the ACT Common Core tests. So then the real knowledge about what data they're collecting comes from what should be available to taxpayers because you're paying this contract. The state's agreement with ACT for the test that they're going to be providing to your schools for those, the federal requirements, the grades 3 to 8, reading and math, and 10th grade. So I have done a little bit of digging into Alabama. I know your state superintendent keeps saying the data is safe, blah, blah, blah. But the real question is not, you make a good point about how, hackers want kids' information. And so if you collect sensitive information, it is vulnerable. And as my co-author on a new data paper that we're going to hopefully release soon here, Jane Robbins, says about this, the only way to keep data safe about children is to not collect it in the first place. So what your state needs to do is have a conversation about what specifically information about children that they need to collect. There's some things that the feds require you to do in order to get federal money. You can't get out of it, and then say, well, we're going to prohibit everything else, or maybe we need these certain things for whatever reason. But that needs to be something that, again, that your elected representatives decide, and not just based on written down contracts that specify what is available, what is allowed, and what is not allowed, rather than assurances from your State Department of Education that nothing could possibly go wrong.
Well, too, I'd like to ask, with a flexibility application requirement of the data, which every state is almost under that, to me, that's another level right there of data that really ACT, they've got theirs, but isn't that another set of data altogether?
That's a good question. So you're talking about the federal government, the Obama administration, has basically rewritten No Child Left Behind. And they basically did it by creating these separate contracts with states. So everything is different for every state, and you have to read your own contract. So that No Child Left Behind waiver, it will specify some of the information about children that your state has promised the feds that you will collect. And again, that's kind of, how do you say it? Another carve out for data collection, because it's not inside the law, right? It's something that these departments are negotiating with themselves, rather than having Congress debate it, our elected representatives, and put it into statute that anyone can read, that is accessible, to people, so they can critique it and realize what their governments are doing to them. So yes, I often, and the other place that I go to look for information about what states are collecting on children is the SLDS, State Longitudinal Database grants from the federal government. The federal government's given 48 states since 2002 grants to develop their data collection systems on children. And so often I will look at what the grant application said, and it will tell you, what they have promised the feds that they will be collecting in return for that money as well.
And where can people find that information, Joy, on the state longitudinal data systems?
Well, you can't find it right now because of the federal shutdown. They've shut down all the websites that provide this information. But the National Center for Education Statistics, when the website goes back up, that's where I always find the contracts. And there's a link that I've just saved that I can use. I can email that to you, or people might be able to do a site search on nces.gov.
And I have that link. I'll put it on our chat here as well. I did just try to get on there yesterday, and you're right. It was, in fact, I have the quote down here. It was just so evident. Closed due to shutdown. I tell you what,
it takes personnel. I hate this. It's so irritating. It takes personnel to take a website down. If you wanted to save money, you would have left it as it was.
Exactly. And someone else sent an email out on Facebook last night, but they were saying, if you're a government employee, it takes memorandums, it takes requests, it takes days, weeks. We know government moves slow. All those signs they had immediately on the monuments, immediately on the parks. Specific signs, shape, size, everything, saying they were closed. Those had to have been printed on their way long before this shutdown was ever known to the rest of us. This shutdown.
Maybe they just are going to put them in a warehouse and bring them back again for the next shutdown because our government can't seem to function.
And the last shutdown was too long ago to even have that be a possibility.
I meant for the next one. That's probably going to happen in January.
Short term, yes, it probably should.
Can I have one more question, Tamara? George?
Yes.
About the fact that we've got these state SLDS now.
Yes.
Yeah, it's almost like it's not just a one-way street where we're giving them information. Doesn't it also mean that the feds really have access to our information?
Yes.
Because they're uploading files all the time.
They're using your children as spies into your home.
Those databases have to be open to the federal government, and they also have to be interoperable with other states' databases as well.
And there's an article, let's see, I'm trying to figure out who that was. It was New York Times. Parents in Louisiana raised a ruckus, this is a quote, after discovering that their children's Social Security numbers had been uploaded to InBloom. We haven't even started to talk about InBloom yet. And actually, we need to take another break and come back and talk about InBloom. And that is another Bill Gates-funded organization that stands to make good money on the warehousing and perhaps selling of our students' information, if that's the case. So we have that happening. We have all kinds of information. Your fathers, whether your parents are foster or natural, whether you're pulled out of school for an illness. Third parties are going to have information that you wouldn't mind a teacher having.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily want someone else having access to, whether they're a marketer, whether they're government, whoever. You don't want to see a student that might struggle with something in the second grade, who we see children, all of a sudden it pops. That reading pops in fourth grade or third grade. But now they could be labeled and limited by these notations that are going to be on their file, not to mention the personal data, somebody else's opinion that's very subjective. And in some of these, they're talking about students labeling situations as victim or perpetrator. That's pretty big language and a pretty big assumption that we're making for some of these records. So we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Diana, you're welcome to stay with us if you want, but Joy Pullmann is my guest with the Heartland Institute, heartland.org. We're talking about the data collection and the mining on your students and the monitors that are going to be wired to your kids if we don't put a stop to this. I'm Tamara Scott. We'll be right back after this message.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
I'm Brian Leach, owner and general manager of Service Legends. I brought along a couple of the home comfort heroes.
Hi, I'm Tammy Wells.
I am Nick Wonderscheid.
I'm administrative manager.
I'm the senior technician
from Service Legends.
It seems like every good thing, when you feel it to the bone that it's good, there's a lot of hard work put behind it. I don't think that you can fake it and have it turn out good.
You know, if we seem like, okay, that's just weird, it's just a furnace, why would you believe so deeply in a furnace? It's not just that, you know, we want to show the world that you can have good service.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be, it's your home.
You know, it's built into our daily trainings, it's built into our culture, that we're going to do whatever it takes to have each client say they love us, period.
That's why we spend all the hours in the training that we do. And if we guarantee it's going to be a good experience for you, or else it's free, what type of work do you think we're going to do?
There is a guarantee.
Temperature selection guarantee, fixed right or it's free guarantee, comfort guarantee, best value guarantee. All of these guarantees hold us accountable to ensuring that we exceed your expectations. And if for whatever reason we'd fail and we can't make it right, we guarantee all of those guarantees with a 100% money back guarantee.
I mean, if you don't think that your technician can fix it right, are you going to say that to a client? No.
You don't have to worry about having a technician come to your house.
We drug test, background check all of our team members. We put safe people in your home. Each and every one of our service techs, 400 hours a year in training.
You tell it the minute they walk in the door. They know what they're doing, they've done their homework, and they actually truly care about what you want.
Because at the end of the day, you're the person that makes sure I have a job.
They're going to be listening. They're going to want to know what your challenges are. Then they're going to come and give you options, and you get to choose.
If I'm there to help and I make it easy and painless, I did my job right that day.
Well, when it comes to your comfort, safety, and your family, you know, you don't necessarily go buy the most expensive, but you get the most bang for your buck.
Oh, it's worth it, because there's a lot of people that will find a way to get it to work right now and then leave and then come back, charge you again, and the cycle just repeats itself. So when I'm out there looking at the furnace, I want to find why it failed today. How can we change the part today with something that you're not going to have to worry about? Is it worth changing the part today? I mean, you can put a lot of money into a furnace. I can fix parts all day. There's good job security in that for me, but is it the right thing for you?
I get a lot of the phone calls of after the technicians are there. They're just in awe. They're like, wow, you guys are great. I mean, I don't even know what to say. You guys are great. Everything you did was perfect. It was great.
Keep going though, I like this.
Just give us a try. I'm gonna take all the risk.
I've got the time to make this right. I've got the support to make it right.
Just check us out.
And if you don't see the value in what we do,
I mean, fixed right or it's free or 100% money back.
Enough said.
I am Tamara Scott. Thank you for staying with us. We're talking about your children and the future of this country, and we're talking about your children being violated, actually, in my opinion, it's so invasive. The Fourth Amendment, no search or seizure without a warrant, and yet the information they're going to have access to, turning your children into spies in your home through the assessments, through the testing, through the assignments. We've got more situations of assignments being asked, very personal questions about your family. The newamerican.com has an article on this. I've put it up on the chat line if you want to go to webcast1live.com. I've got several links there for you. But they go through the procedure. The camera captures facial expressions. Software on the laptop extracts geometric properties of the face. Other devices such as the posture analysis seat, pressure mouse, wireless skin conductance sensor, which looks like a wide black bracelet strapped to a child's wrist, are all designed to collect physiological response data from a biofeedback apparatus that measures the blood volume, the pulse, the galvanic skin response to examine a student's frustration. Are they just going to be giving our kids scenarios, asking them questions they know they won't answer or have the answer to so they can see how well they handle stress? Is their concern here more than all the information they're getting? If you had a government, and we don't ever like to bring in situations that are extreme, but if you had a government who was trying to come up with a fighting force that would turn on their fellow man, this would be a great way to measure responses. When you show an animal being hurt, if that child doesn't respond or flinch or their heart rate, the danger that this program that can go into. And our founding fathers know this danger. which is why they have so many protections in place. And this information, this seeking of information, I think falls way outside those boundaries. And on the 2010 National Center of Education Statistics released a technical brief about the guidance for statewide longitudinal data systems, which formulated a detailed plan. And this is the last line of that paragraph. It says, sensitive information will also be extracted, which delves into the intimate details of students' lives. That's pretty straightforward. Some of the examples we have, and this is again from the New American, political affiliations, mental, psychological problems in the family or of the student, sexual behaviors, attitudes, illegal, antisocial, self-incriminating, demeaning behavior, critical appraisals of others, individuals with whom respondents have close family relationships, legally recognized privileged relationships such as those as lawyers, physicians, ministers, religious practices, affiliations, belief of a student's or student's parents, income other than that required by law to determine eligibility for participation in a program or receiving financial assistance. It's unclear whether these students will be required to answer this information or if something will, they'll face any type of repercussion if they refuse. And in New York, parents are telling their students to refuse. Joy, when you hear this information, what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't know if you saw my facial expressions just a few seconds ago.
I didn't have the facial camera on you.
I think they express my thoughts very well. I mean, and
that's a great point, Joy. If you're taking a test and they have that camera on you and they don't like your expression, is that going to weigh in on a student's ability to move
nanny
forward?
state to a whole new level, right? Wipe that smirk off your face, young man.
Right.
And so instead of having the teacher in front of the room do it, who knows, someone at, Bureaucracy Central, wipe that face off, that smirk off your face, young man. I was also thinking, it's kind of like you walk down the street, someone, maybe is wearing Google glasses, looks at you. Oh, hello, 45321AB0.
I know. We've seen that satire, if you will. We've seen the animated cartoons of assembly line things, and usually in commercials, assembly lines are never referred to as good. They're always kind of the bad, and we want the natural product or the homegrown product. And I think we are turning to things more natural.
I'm fine with an assembly line for cars, but these are children. These are human beings. You can't treat them like cattle or cars. I mean, you don't manufacture children. You don't monitor children. You parent them. You shepherd them. You cultivate them. You treat them with respect because they're human beings. I mean, the children in the U.S. population, I hate, I read all these reports and they talk about children like, they're our nation's greatest natural resource. Our children are a natural resource. They're human beings who have ideas. And they're, they generate them themselves and so forth. They're like, they are learning to be autonomous, self-governing individuals, and they can't be that way if you're meddling with their brains. Anyway.
Yeah. And not to mention, I can't think of her name. Who is the female who's on video saying that we need to think of children as a collective of the community?
Oh, yes, Melissa Harris Perry. She's, I think, MSNBC host, TV host.
Why these people think they have any influence as to how we raise our kids is quite frightening. And again, it feeds into the peer pressure mentality, the group think that has been brought onto us in the political parties, unfortunately. You are not a group. Your power is from you as an individual. The power is with we, the people, not an identity of a group. And this will not help that either. Joy.
And sure, all of this, it destroys individuality. I mean, you become not your own person who has thoughts from within yourself that you can keep private. But everything has to be exposed to everyone all the time, and you become flat.
Absolutely flat. Mm-hmm. A Da Vinci, an Einstein, someone who thought outside of the box, who didn't fit into their questions. Those kids won't make it under this. They'll be labeled, I think. I don't think they'll have the opportunity to flourish, to thrive at the point when they, Einstein, didn't he fail math before he came up?
I know that Thomas Edison did. His teacher thought that he was a dumbbell.
I think Einstein did as well. I think Mary Burns talks about that.
There's a young man who they're hailing as the next Einstein. He's about 14 years old and already doing, quantum physics. And his teachers early on also, he was, labeled, he has autism, and so they just thought, wow, he's never going to be able to do anything. And he's like a ridiculous genius.
In his own time, in his own way. And
with his mother fighting for every step of anything that he's gotten.
And that's the key for every parent. This is going to be really difficult for you to understand what's coming down the pike, what your kids are being faced with at school. You're going to have to be ever vigilant on your guard if you're not homeschooling or private schooling. And even if you're doing that, Joy, will private schools be forced to go through this data collection?
Well, it all depends. Right now, states are allowed to regulate private and homeschools. And so in a number of states, they require private and homeschools to take the state tests. Or in many voucher programs, which I am in favor of, they require schools to administer state tests. So if those state tests become the vehicle for monitoring, for collection of information, and so forth, then yes.
So there's our answer. Even though so Iowa passed a great what people touted as a great education reform bill last year, in that they no longer had to fill out CPI forms, competent instruction forms, private instruction forms. But that may not matter then if your child wants to go on to a college, takes a college entrance exam. Those exams will be aligned with the Common Core. So the worldview will come from a Common Core. We know it's warped with evolution, environmentalist global warming, and we now see the social indoctrination through some of these homework assignments. So your student's already going to be at a disadvantage there, but now they may also be susceptible to the data information, the data mining. Talk to us about In Bloom. In Bloom, see all these new organizations, these new terms, Chief of Council State Schools, something new people had never heard about. U.S. Education Delivery Institute, something new people had never heard about. All these new organizations coming in. What is In Bloom?
Well, In Bloom is basically a private nonprofit that is also funded by the Gates Foundation. And they say that their goal is to take all of these different data systems that schools use. So they have one for maybe behavior management, one for student grades, one for GPA, one for student activities, what extracurriculars is he or she involved in, and it basically helps all of those communicate with and talk to each other, so that you don't have to have 4 different logins for all these different systems, and you can basically put a student's profile all in one place, all of his or her information in one place, not in 12 different systems. So that's the basic introduction. And the reason that parents are concerned about it is because basically In Bloom is it's a private national database of student information. So they store kids' information up in the cloud, and they are collecting, like I said, a lot of really highly personal things about kids. In New York, they had homeschool kids' information. They had social security numbers. Like you mentioned, that was something that Louisiana uploaded all those social security numbers into this private database until the state, parents freaked out and the state says they backed out and so forth. The basic, so for example, the New York Times did an article on Jefferson County, Colorado, and a school district that's doing In Bloom, and parents there are angry for the same reason, because they're saying, look, you went for this because it helps you streamline your data systems, but this is at the expense of without checking into the effects on our children of letting private third parties have access to all of our personal information. So that's what it is, and that's, I think, just kind of a basic outline of the controversy.
And we don't have any guarantee that information, which will be a monopoly for In Bloom, great investment for Bill Gates, may or may not be sold to private or corporations or marketing entities. We have no guarantee.
Well, in fact, that was one of the great things that they said that In Bloom would facilitate is like, look, now that we have all this information in one place about children, we can do studies on the data. We can use it to indicate what kinds of things school districts need and so forth. And so education technology developers were really excited about having access to that information because it could show them what the market wants, what kids need, what districts are looking for, just basic information about children, how they learn and so forth. So they were really excited about that. At the same time that parents were the ones who were really unexcited about that.
Paula Noonan, a Jeff Koch school board member, and I think she's out of New York, but she could be out of Louisiana, said 50% of this project has good intentions. But the other 50% is totally full of risk that hasn't been examined or weighed. And the concern is our children, our families, our privacy, our potential for great risk is really high, and our children are the casualties here.
Right. So my real concern about In Bloom, for example, is that if a parent wants to give her kids information up for an experiment, that's her business, that's her family's business. But when you cannot opt out of that without pulling your children out of your local public schools, you have no access to your public schools without also being automatically enrolled in data mining that shares your personal information. That coercion is the real problem, where they just say, oh, well, your kid's enrolled. Now we have your information. We can do whatever I want with it. No, you can't. My child is not automatically yours just because I enrolled him in your school. Thanks.
But under this program, schools will have to participate, correct?
Well, if the state implements it like New York has done, then yes, public schools will have to participate.
And so there's our call to action. What would you also say for listeners and viewers? It doesn't matter what state, but here's your call to action. Your legislature didn't bring it in, but they absolutely can be instrumental in stopping it from full implementation. They can stop in the funding. They could stop in some of the data mining, perhaps. What would you say? What would you leave parents, taxpayers with as action items?
Usually when I talk to lawmakers, related to Common Core, one of the top things I say is you need a state student privacy law. Federal privacy law for students has been erased. It is worthless. You need one that your state controls, that you have a public debate over, that you settle through the representative process. So that's the number one action item. That's something to start telling all of your lawmakers that you want done immediately. And the second thing that I would say is also stop taking federal grants for database initiatives. All they do is create problems, privacy invasions, open your kids up for more mining, and they promote this whole technocracy where the elites get to look into your kids' minds without your permission. So those are the top two things I would say. And also, if you want something you can do immediately, you should go to your local school district. There are opt-out forms for Common Core testing, for data mining, and they may reject it, but the least you can do is say, I do not want my children's information sent out of state unless it is required under federal law, under state law, or so forth. And I also want to know what information you're collecting about my child because you have the right to see and correct the record.
And that's something we've talked about here in Iowa. Can the legislature put a law forth that schools cannot collect data from students without first notifying parents?
Yes.
So that's something a state could do. First, you notify parents before you take any data from a child. I think if school boards,
or in the case of federal funds, you could say whatever is federally mandated, parents must be at least notified of that.
I think that would be a great first step, because before a school just takes this information, if they had to notify you every time, that would slow it down. Plus, it would alarm parents as to how much information is being, in their terms, extracted. What an ugly term, extracted. They're treating our children like they're cells in a petri dish.
Yes.
It's so frightening. All right, so there's your action item, state privacy laws. And so you're saying, Joy, would that trump, because we often hear, well, the federal government's taking care of that, but we have states' rights, 10th Amendment, and a state law protecting privacy rights should be in place.
You also need to withdraw from the National Common Core tests, because if you send your data out of state to, so for example, one of the Common Core testing organizations is headquartered in Washington State. If you send that information out of your state, then the information no longer is subject to your state privacy law. So that is a third item. Get rid of Common Core tests as soon as possible.
So get rid of the Common Core test, state privacy law, stop accepting grants. And Henry Burke was on with us earlier in the month, and he gave us the state-specific cost, $184 million for Iowa to implement this. And he says states that do not accept the non-Common Core states will be better off financially. Non-Common Core states will save money over those taking money to implement Common Core. It will cost you more in the long run. And then the opt-out form, that you can opt out of the test or the information and a parental notification. Joy, thank you for joining me today. Thank you so much for giving us your time, for studying this issue. It's not a fun issue to study. I didn't want to get involved in it. My kids are out of school. I'm an empty nester. I did not want to get involved in this, and it's so incredibly invasive and unpatriotic, unconstitutional, and these are our future. These kids are our future.
That's right. We shape the government. The government does not shape us. This is the American right and responsibility.
Very good. Joy Pullmann has been my guest today. You can find Joy at Heartland Institute, heartland.org, not to be confused with the Heartland Education Association here in Iowa. No, she's with another organization, a national organization, heartland.org. And I am Tamara Scott. I thank you for joining us today. These are your kids. They're yours. God gave you those kids, and he uniquely designed you to raise them. Nobody else. Not the teacher, not the pastor, not anyone else. You're responsible for your kids. And for those of you who are considering what you can do and getting your students out of the public schools, I say more power to you. There are many groups that can help you. There's great helps out there online. There's great organizations locally. And if you've got information on that, you can contact us here. You can email truth for our time at gmail.com, stopcommoncoreiowa@gmail.com, or Tamara Scott Live at gmail.com, and we'll get information to you. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for caring enough about your country to spend time with us today. I'm Tamara Scott. Be encouraged, but never be complacent.